Hello, welcome to Legerity's Banking Showcase. I'm your host, Mike Wilson. It's my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. We're joined by experts from across the marketplace exploring the challenges and opportunities facing banking and finance today. Banking today face particular challenges of increased volume, decreased margin, increased regulation, but also the opportunity of digital transformation and unlocking data and new applications and processes for their business and for their teams. In today's showcase, I'm joined by Dafydd Llewellyn. Dafydd is the General Manager EMEA of insightsoftware. Legerity have just been acquired by insightsoftware, and Dafydd will be sharing with us the challenges he's seen across the marketplace and the thousands of customers that insightsoftware are providing solutions for. I'm also joined by Sipiere. Elizabeth Sipiere is the Chief Revenue Officer at Legerity, and she'll be sharing in greater detail the Legerity fast-post accounting platform and how being cloud native is ideally placed to address some of the challenges that banks are facing, particularly with banking as a service and with RegTech. We then have one of two industry panels today with our friends from Tier 1 investment bank ING. Nicholas Wykes, VP of Sales at Legerity, will be joined by Kersic, Future Architect, and we'll be exploring banking as a service in greater detail. We'll be looking at what is it, how does it work, why is it important, what are the benefits. And then to conclude today's showcase, I'm delighted to moderate a panel discussion on RegTech, inviting Jen Gavronsky, CTO of FINOS. Now, FINOS is the FinTech Open Source Foundation of the Linux Foundation, alongside Hollowbread, Managing Director at Global Innovation, Safe and Compliance at ING, with Stuart, COO at Legerity. And we'll be discussing RegTech from both an industry perspective and how the need for collaboration that Jane will touch on. Ian will talk about the need for innovation and agility from a regulated firm like ING. And then Stuart will give a vendor perspective and how Legerity are solving some of the really difficult problems in regulation today. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dafydd Llewellyn, General Manager EMEA of insightsoftware to the stage. Daf, good morning. Daf, could you introduce yourself and insightsoftware to our audience, please?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So my name's Daf. I'm the General Manager for EMEA at insightsoftware. I'm responsible for our go-to-market teams in the region. insightsoftware has over 500 employees that are servicing the needs of close to 10,000 customers in the region. I get asked a lot, what do insightsoftware do? And effectively, we specialise in reporting, analytics, and performance management solutions. And at the bottom of it, really, it's about helping organisations understand their data better to help make better business decisions and have better business outcomes, which we know is so important these days with so much insecurity going on in the world.
Legerity are a new addition to insightsoftware. Could you maybe share with us what Legerity bring to insightsoftware?
Yeah, well, we're incredibly thrilled to have acquired Legerity. I think there's a couple of things. One is they have fantastic technology. It's cloud-based technology. They've got an incredibly market-leading accounting rules engine, which helps organizations with their financial transformation, but also really importantly around things like IFRS compliance. So if you think about insurance, IFRS 17 compliance. So I know you're going to hear a ton more on that later during this meeting. So we are so thrilled to welcome Legerity's customers, their partners, and of course the very talented employees that they have too.
Daf, could you identify some of the key challenges you're seeing facing your clients across the marketplace today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the major one is when you look at, say, the role of finance, it's really changed over the last couple of years. The role of finance is much more strategic now. So finance really needs to be there to deliver insights to the organization to help them make better business decisions. And they really do need technology to enable them to, operate efficiently, but also to deliver those insights to the organization. So if you think about, we've been through the COVID crisis, the companies that I guess were able to survive and thrive were ones that were able to make better and more nimble business decisions. If you look at the situation right now with supply chain issues, price increases, organizations are having to make quick decisions, and they need and rely on finance to provide the insights that they need. The second piece is regulatory compliance. There is more of that around today than ever before. And that puts a huge responsibility on organisations to make sure they are compliant to those legislative rules. And again, I think companies need to look to technology to help them with that and enable them to, focus on their day-to-day business and have comfort that they are aligned to the legislative rules.
Today we're chatting about banking as a service and regulatory technology. Why is Legerity ideally placed to solve these problems for banks?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is Legerity is born in the cloud. It's something we call cloud native. So it's originated in the cloud, which means that our customers, and those customers are some of the largest banks and insurance companies in the world, benefit from incredible security. It's a high-performing, incredibly innovative, rule-based engine that helps our customers with financial transformation, but also organisations that need to be IFRS compliant, for example, in insurance with IFRS 17 compliance. Also, it's a no-code based solution, which makes it incredibly easy to integrate and interface with other systems, and that allows IT to focus on what they really want to be focusing on, rather than having to integrate with Legerity. So, incredibly powerful tool that's easy to implement and drives value within our customers in an incredibly quick period of time.
Touching on regulation and finance ops, how are Legerity helping deliver in that arena today? Why is it important?
It's important because there is just more and more, legislative requirements out there. Whether that's a really common one right now we hear a lot about is ESG, so around climate and the environment, and companies need help in terms of complying to that new legislation. So by working with Legerity, we have so many pre-built use cases that use Legerity to help around ensuring compliance to these ever-changing legislative rules. So you're going to hear a lot more today around how Legerity in a detailed way helps with those use cases. But it's I guess really a solution where we want to give our customers peace of mind that they are compliant and can rapidly become compliant in an ever-changing world of legislation today.
And Daf, finally, if there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away from today's discussion, what would that be?
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank our audience for attending today and for our panel of guests. But I think I'd just like to urge everyone who's attending to just think about the way that they're using technology within their organisations, and whether they are maximising the opportunity that technology brings to enable their organisations, their businesses to operate efficiently, and giving them the insights that they need to make quick and effective business decisions that help grow their organisations and their businesses.
Well, Daf, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So next, I'm delighted to welcome Elizabeth Sipiere, Chief Revenue Officer of Legerity, who's going to explore banking as a service and RegTech in greater detail. Elizabeth, could you introduce yourself and your role at Legerity, please?
Hi, Mike. Yes, I'm Elizabeth Sipiere, and I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Legerity, and I largely look after our sales teams and some of our account management and customer success activity.
Now, Elizabeth, we're going to chat about three things today, building on Daf's scene set for our showcase today, and that's banking as a service. We'll take a particular look at finance risk and regulatory reporting. So if we think about banking as a service, could you help maybe delve a little bit deeper what we mean by banking as a service to our audience, please?
So to talk about what we mean, well, generally banking as a service is really a bank kind of lending its banking license and its ability to provide banking, regulated banking services that can be used by another entity, perhaps a shop or a store, or it could even be your dentist, but that means that you can actually, take out loans, etc., as part of your actual shopping transaction. So that's what we tend to mean by, embedded finance or banking as a service. The amazing thing about that is that the whole of banking has to change. Traditionally, the process for, if you bought a car or a piece of furniture and you took out some hire purchase or loan, you would have a completely separate transaction and a lot of paperwork with your bank. You would wait your credit approval. There were many things would happen long before you actually got a loan. And actually, for the back office of a bank, the fact the front office was taking time was probably reasonably convenient. But now, we're talking about attracting the likes of IKEA, ASOS, Walmart. These are people competing with Amazon. They want to be fast and agile. And really what we've done is enable banks to do that.
So you're picking up some great keywords, are agile and fast. Now, Daf talked about being cloud native and agile. Could you maybe just elaborate on what Legerity being cloud native means for your customers?
Well, really, being in the cloud means that you can elastically expand. It enables you to do so in a secure, safe way at, in our case, we have linear scalability. So we can, if we start with one branch, say we're talking to somebody in Canada at the moment, we start with one of their branches and they've probably got 180 branches. That's really no issue to just start rolling out all the others in a line, knowing that you will just be able to automatically scale. I suppose the other thing about cloud is that, we for a long time, our customers access the software through the cloud. And of course, you can be anywhere, anytime to use it. There are a whole lot of other things that go with it. It's very easy to deploy. It reduces the cost of managing stuff inside a bank. There's a lot of benefits from using the cloud. And I think everybody's learned that, accelerated use during COVID has really proved the point.
Now, I know that one thing that Legerity are very much at the vanguard for is no-code, and you're a no-code platform. Could you maybe just talk about why Legerity is a no-code platform? What does that mean for your customers? Well,
I think this is the thing that really matters for the embedded finance and banking as a service. If you've suddenly got to be really agile, actually, a lot of the sort of accounting rules that Legerity did originally came from investment banking and telcos. And these were industries where they actually had to accelerate product development to make reasonable margins. The innovation enabled them to keep up. So you get into a world where actually you want to be able to dynamically change accounting rules. You don't want to write a spec, send it to a Java programmer, go through a whole lot of testing and eventually roll it out, perhaps only quarterly or at some fixed time. So now within FastPost, you can edit rules. You can actually edit some on screen with the right reviews and approvals, but you can also apply this Excel-like logic on the screen. So you can actually edit certain logic around if this, then that. That gives you a whole lot of stuff. First of all, it gives you a lot of agility, time to market, but also it gives you complete transparency. In the old days, if you were actually coding accounting rules, when you get into your regulatory processes, you actually can't see the rules. So the low-code stuff is giving us a lot of benefits. But most of all, it enables people to, attract people who've got dynamic product change, introducing new stores and rapid innovation.
Well, this leads me nicely to my next question. So we've touched on no-code, cloud-delivered, agility, business rules, user-defined, all these towards business rule definition, regulatory reporting, and this single version of the truth. Now, it's something Legerity talk a lot about, this single version of the truth and reg reporting and financial reporting. Could maybe just touch on that for our audience and what we mean by that?
I think a lot of banks know what a not single version of the truth is. There's been a lot of I think since 2008, there's been a lot of change in the regulatory landscape, and there's a lot of new regulation, or relatively new, that requires a really strong alignment between your regulatory reporting, your risk reporting, and your finance reporting. And all of those regulations are better met if you've got one transaction somewhere that is feeding finance and risk in the same manner. If not, you end up with a lot of reconciliation and a lot of audit and traceability problems. And that's the beginning of the problem. The second major challenge, if you haven't got a single source of the truth, you end up in a rush, usually, when you're about to submit, doing lots of adjustments, and you're doing adjustments in lots of different places. And then you have to go back and you have to start tracing, okay, I've done my adjustments here, there, and everywhere. If you also have a single place of adjustment, which you need a fairly agile system for, then you actually are beginning to be on a reasonable path.
And that's a great point to maybe point out to audience too, is that Legerity sits alongside the general ledger. And maybe just touch on why you're so agile and how you're a kind of at the point of need solution.
Legerity generally receives transactions from core systems, from your embedded finance transactions, or your retail banking transactions, or your card transactions, or your corporate lending transactions, or treasury. Those are the kinds of places in a bank we receive transactions for. We then apply the accounting logic to them, and we generate journals. Once we've generated the journals, we store them in a detailed level in the subledger, and then gets aggregated up to enable, first of all, feeding your GL, but also actually a fair amount of regulatory reporting and other sort of, management reporting. For example, how performant are your channels, which stores are actually bringing you in money, etc. And so that's really, and because we receive the transactions, the ideal is we integrate closely with other reg reporting systems, so we're all using the same version of the transactions. Generally, we also receive reference data, customer data, hugely challenging area, rates data, currency data, and all of that. If a bank can also have single sources of the truth for that, because that also feeds many systems, then you've really got a good chance at consistency.
Brilliant. So, Elizabeth, a hugely exciting time for Legerity. Here we are coming halfway through 2022. Is there any key highlights you'd like to share with the audience today?
I wanted to try to understand that although we solve, a lot of issues with embedded finance and reg reporting, it always comes down to data. And in fact, when you're thinking about reporting, the piece that I think we really help with is these new regulations like BCBS 239 in Europe, where actually people want to know about the auditability and traceability. Unlike other systems, you can't put this stuff in a data warehouse because you lose that. We are a finance system first and foremost, and we have complete audit trails and transparency and double entry bookkeeping. So you can always trust the numbers. So whatever's going into your books and records is highly trustworthy.
Fantastic. It's all about trust and all about data. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm now delighted to be joined with the first of our industry panels. I'm delighted to welcome to Ron Kersic, Future Architects ING, and Nicholas Wykes, Vice President of Sales at Legerity. Ron, if I start with you, maybe you could introduce yourself and your role at ING, please.
Yes, of course. So my name is Ron Kersic, and I work at ING Tech at the intersection of architecture, strategy, and innovation.
And Nicholas, if you maybe introduce yourself and your role at Legerity, please.
Thank you, Mike. So my name is Nicholas. I'm VP of Sales in Legerity, and my background was really around data initially, and then recently moved to the accounting data space. With Legerity, we first focused on IFRS 17 over the past 2 years, but now we're doing a very big move toward the banking industries, and embedded finance has become a very, very hot topic.
Brilliant. So this section is all about that, banking as a service and embedded finance. And we're building on this scene set from Daf, and Elizabeth too shared with us how Legerity ideally plays to address some of that. But Ron, if I turn to you first, maybe to help our audience, what is banking as a service and why is it important?
Yeah, so banking as a service is offering complete end-to-end banking processes, loans, payments, deposit accounts, as digital services, APIs, if you want, on top of a existing bank's regulated and secure infrastructure. So that's banking as a service. And what that actually allows is that non-financial brands can start embedding those financial services in their customer experiences to start increasing the value offered to their customers and to hopefully retain their customers better. So in that sense, banking as a service is instrumental in uncovering and growing a great variety of new and rather exciting digital business ecosystems.
So sometimes, Ron, people use banking as a service and embedded finance in the same sentence. Maybe there's a distinction between those two arenas you'd like to draw for audience before I turn to Nicholas to talk about how this stuff works. But the distinction maybe between banking as a service and embedded finance would be great.
Yeah, I mean, they are really just two sides of the same coin. So banking as a service is what a bank does, right? It provides its services in the shape of an API. And embedded finance is what the non-financial brand does by embedding those services in its customer experience. So it's really a question of where you're starting your journey of understanding, at the bank side, banking as a service, or at the non-financial brand side, and that's embedded finance.
Fantastic. Legerity, turning to you, Nicholas. As a provider and a vendor, you serve both these communities, both banks and kind of non-bank, non-financial institutions too, in grappling with embedded finance. Could you maybe explain how it works?
Yeah, so embedded finance involve actually a number of elements. We're helping in some of them, but if you consider embedded finance and how it impacts the bank, initially a lot of the more legacy bank had old IT systems or old IT processes. The embedded finance, the bank as a service now bring a very much dynamic, flexible environment. So the whole idea, as Ron was saying, is to bring an API-driven environment for people to offer those financial services. The impact for the banks is that it needs to integrate within a broader legacy environment, but the advantage that the bank are bringing is very strong regulatory understanding. And so the complexity of this journey is to offer those new products and being able to configure them quickly, scale them to be in contact with a lot of potential customers, and at the same time offering all the solidity, the rigors of a highly regulated environment. And that's where the complexity, I would say, of the accounting and the finance process is really going to play.
And so this is touching on, Ron talked about the APIs, these integration-wise, this kind of embedding this into the workflow. Ron, if I turn back to you, so no more bricks and mortars, banking as a service, everything's embedded. What are the benefits? I guess, first of all, to the bank, but also to the customer, the two types of benefits you could expect to deliver, both for ING, but maybe for this industry as a whole.
So for the provider of digital services, so for the bank, they now can reach their customers in context and markets they couldn't before, or maybe only at high cost. They now can even start reaching customers that weren't their customers in the first place, that were hard to acquire. And now by leaning on the help of a non-financial brand that embeds the services in their customer experience, you now get to reach those customers. And for that brand that does the embedding of financial services, they get to increase the value of their products, right? Increase customer lifetime value, maybe even lower customer acquisition cost, without the need for them to start running a scalable, regulated and secure financial infrastructure.
No, Nicholas, turning to you again, I want to dwell further on the benefits. I want to key off what Elizabeth said earlier about those being able to, for ASOS, and she talked about these really great examples of integrating ledgers and accounting in that way. Ron just touched on some of the benefits of breaking down those type of barriers to technology. Could you maybe elaborate the benefits for banking as a service embedding that way from a risk and finance ops perspective? What does that mean for the people who are kind of controlling these environments?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic that I have the feeling is sometimes a little bit avoided. So there is three really main people who will be affected from an accounting perspective with those new services. So there is the end customer who has access now to much more financial services, the non-financial organization who offer services that it doesn't have experience providing, doesn't know about the regulation around it. And then there is the bank who now has access to a much broader set of customers and offer a much more diverse type of offering to those customers. So when we think about the bringing of the accounting for the person in between, so that these non-financial organizations who offer financial services, they will have to account for those inside the accounting processes. And they can either have the skill in-house that they can then leverage, and they just need access to a platform and to have access to the accounting logic to the banking as a service offering. Or even if they don't have the knowledge and the skills, they could actually request for the financial reporting and to have extract that they can automatically integrate inside the accounting process. So those dimensions are very, very complex for accounting department, for the bank and for the person providing the services. The end user just have access to much more. Then if you go even further than that, now you start to think about the new product that those non-financial services organizations offer and how you build new accounting rules around that. Elizabeth mentioned earlier the use of no-code, low-code platform. That's quite interesting because you want to accelerate speed to bring in those new products. It needs to be done nearly in real time. and the fact that you no longer depend on the IT and the complex coding, but the finance department can take control of that is critical. If I can just touch on two more, there is the last one, which is really around the reporting for the bank. If you think about the fact that there is those new groups, there is those new products, it creates a lot of new dimensions. And the idea of a subledger, a multi-dimensional subledger, enable now the bank to look at finance reporting, revenue, strategic decision in a much more advanced way. And so combining those three drivers, you can think about the impact to the finance department and how actually it has such a massive correlation between embedded finance and accounting processes. To put a final note, all of this is only possible if you can go at scale, if you can integrate that with open source technology, and if you can actually do that in real time. And that's why it's so critical to use the modern technologies that are ready for the future. I don't like the future proof because we're not proved against the future, we're future ready. And that's very, very important.
I'm looking forward to our next guest from ING. We're going to touch on open source too. But I just want to pick up, Ron, returning to you. So this sounds great for the end user, lots of great increased competition. But is this an opportunity or a threat to traditional banking? How is it being viewed, Ron?
It's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity because, in essence, this is inevitable. Right? Software is eating the world, Mark Andreessen said, I think almost a decade ago. And this is happening. This digitization of products and services and communication in the end is happening. And once you have digitized something, even if it is a banking service, it gets composed and it gets embedded in other contexts. So this is a very natural way of progressing, and because it's such a natural and inevitable way of progressing, I would say it's best to embrace it.
And staying with you, Ron, how will we measure these benefits? What's the scale of measurement? I think that'd be a great thing to share with our audience. I'll ask you the same question too, Nicholas.
Yeah. So I think that the benefits, as touched upon earlier, I think they come down to either increased scale at the banking as a service side, or increased value provided by the embedded finance side. And this would be the way of measuring things, right? The number of transactions, the cost per transaction, lifetime value, customer acquisition costs. So that would be your typical metrics there. But I think there is another one we really should discuss a bit, and that's when you start delivering services digitally, right? In context that you don't own, in context that you never considered. There is a great opportunity for the service provider to actually learn more about their product and their service and the applicability of their product. So I think that learning and how you actually capture on the learning is maybe another way of measuring the benefits. So maybe the number of product iterations in the service you're providing and the speed with those iterations are getting rolled out. That would be another way of measuring or quantifying the benefits here.
It's fantastic when you think this kind of pivot from banking bricks and mortars to truly platform, and then a decomposed platform with different functions you can pick and mix from. Same question to you, Nicholas. How will we measure these benefits? And just a couple of words on that.
Yeah, so I think the main benefits of all of that is the offering of new services and how it open to imagination and creativity. So because now all those non-financial organizations who think differently, who are not stuck in the history of being a bank for so many years and offering certain services, they're just like thinking about their customers and how they can actually do something that's going to help them. And then they build a product and then they're getting rolled out. This is going to make actually the type of financial services we get much more exciting and much more valuable for the end users.
It's really fit for purpose for digital age. Wonderful. So, Ron, I'm going to turn to you for just one final closing. If there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away from our brief chat today on banking as a service, and what would that be, Ron?
It's the, I think already touched upon on this one, but it's worth reiterating on. And that is, this is going to happen, right? So this is inevitable. This is what digitization does. And I would really invite everyone not just to stop at the digitization part of the equation, but also at the transformation part, right? So not just digitizing your channels, but really take this opportunity to rethink your business model and rediscover new business models.
That's wonderful. I guess too, kind of looking at the business models, different components in your workflow and your value chain really brings that to life. Fantastic. Same question to you, Nicholas. If there's one thing briefly the audience should take away from today, what would that be?
So I think it's the most important is not being scared about your legacy systems. It's offering a new service and finding a way to bridge the gap between this new platform that you built and your legacy system. And that's possible. So it should not be redesigning everything that you've done. It's about how you can integrate that into this opportunity to offer new services. And if you're even better, you can use that as a driver for finance transformation across your organization in a phased approach.
I love it. Don't be afraid of the gap and bring on transformation. Wonderful. Ron, Nicholas, thank you ever so much. And now I'm delighted to be joined by my closing panel. We're going to explore regulatory technology. And RegTech is a very well understood term, but I'm delighted to be joined by three thought leaders from across the marketplace, uniquely bringing together their insights to share with you today. We're joined by Jane Gavronsky. Jane Gavronsky is CTO at FINOS, and FINOS is the FinTech Open Source Foundation and the Linux Foundation. And Jane will share her perspective on how collaboration is key across industries to really address some of these regulatory challenges. We're then joined by Ian Hollowbread. Ian Hollowbread is Managing Director, Global Innovation Lead at Safe and Compliant at ING Bank. Now, Ian is a strong voice in regulatory technology and regulatory innovation, and he'll be sharing with us why agility is important and what RegTech innovation really means. And then we're delighted to be joined by Stuart Eden. Stuart Eden is COO at Legerity, and he'll be giving us a vendor perspective. You know, we've explored earlier today with Legerity why a single version of the truth, a data robustness, business rules definition are really key for empowering users and helping with transparency and financial reporting. So the format of this chat is I'm going to turn to each of my guests one at a time, ask them a question. They'll introduce themselves, their role in their particular firms, and they will get underway. So straight away I'm going to turn to Jane Gavronsky. Jane, hello, good morning, welcome all the way in New York. Jane, could you introduce your role at FINOS and maybe for our audience set the scene of what FINOS are all about?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me here today. It's always fun to speak with you. I am CTO at FINOS. FINOS is the FinTech Open Source Foundation. And my role at FINOS is to bring business problems across the financial services space together with open source solutions. And this is our mission at FINOS. We aim to enable the use of open source technologies to solve problems in financial services. And as part of that, we have a strategic initiative called Open RegTech and a Reg Innovation SIG, a special interest group where industry participants come together to discuss their approaches to solving regulatory compliance and sharing those approaches together and looking for projects which they can collaborate on to bring more innovative and more interesting mutualized solutions to the marketplace where they can share the development and of course share their ideas. So currently, we see a lot of interest in this area. Many market participants are participating in our SIG and proposing projects. We have sell-side firms, we have buy-side firms, commercial banks, even regulators are exploring the potential of open source. And this is an area where we see lots of activity. Mutualizing the collaboration of solutions in open source has many benefits to the participants. Obviously, one is that it maximizes innovation because it brings the best ideas and the best experts together across the industry. It's certainly faster time to market and more cost effective because you're benefiting from everyone investing into it together. And it's a sustainable, more modern way of delivering software. So we have several projects which have already been proposed and several projects which are being discussed. And there's a lot of opportunity for more industry participants to come in and share and learn from each other. So I can mention some of those projects if you're interested, or we can discuss
I'd love to.
later.
Yes, I'd love to. I definitely want to touch on some of those projects. But you've touched on a key point there, which is a great segue to Ian. And so, Ian, maybe introduce your role at ING. But also, I want to pick up on what Jane has said there. Traditionally, banks use technology to compete against each other. Now we're seeing banks collaborating together, the kind of mutualization within RegTech. So maybe touch on that too. So, Ian, maybe you just introduce your role at ING. What does global lead innovation for safe and compliant mean? And it is building off that point that Jay made about his collaboration and innovation on RegTech.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So about a year or so ago, we established a new function within innovation at ING called ING Neo. And as part of that function, we set up a number of different value spaces to drive and focus in our innovation efforts. One of those value spaces was safe and compliant, and I've been fortunate enough to take the lead of that. And it's really looking to how we leverage our full capabilities around partnerships, around the investments with our ventures and with our labs, how we develop assets to really solve emerging technology problems in the regulatory space. So yeah, it's a relatively new function. But it combines all of our great activities, which we do from an innovation area together.
Now, you're also co-chair of the SIG group at FINOS. So maybe just before I turn to Stuart, just touch on what open source means for innovating at ING and what open source means for innovating in RegTech, please, Ian.
Yeah, look, I think I've been working in the regulatory technology domain for over between 5 and 10 years now, and the challenge that I see as an industry is that regulation's a shared problem, but we don't always look at it as in a shared and common way. The benefit of open source is it brings commonality across the industry. It brings a shared goal and a shared vision, which we can all access and which we can then all solve the problems and challenges that we face as organisations. So for me, the future of regulation only sits within, or really sits within, the open source. And I think that there's so much potential out there, and it's really how do we unlock that potential?
I think that's a perfect tee up to Stuart. So we touched on some key themes, Stuart. Maybe just introduce your role at Legerity. And then I want to explore more about how Legerity approach regulatory technology, and particularly maybe touching on open source and some of the key components in your own architecture.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So my name's Stuart Eden. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Legerity. I also head of delivery, so I'm sort of responsible for all our implementation projects. Legerity is a fast post platform, is a completely open source platform. So all the technology we've built on is open source and available for anyone. I've come from historically a sort of a line or a long time in banking, and I've seen when things go wrong and how bad that gets. So non-standardized data, everyone trying to run their processes, their calculations, using their own versions of the truth, their own different sets of data. So what we're trying to do at Legerity is to very much standardize that. We'll bring in a financial data model, which should be open source, or a bank's own data model if they prefer to use that. And we make sure we bring one version of the truth in, and we run all our reporting processes off of that. So all the sort of financial statements information, but more importantly, all that information is then used to drive the regulatory reporting. So any capital calculations can be fed into or fed from that data set. So for us, that's really important. And for banks, I think that makes life for them a lot easier. There's no more of these reconciliations where you're going point to point and having to bring two numbers together and try and work out why they may be different. And I think initiatives like the FINOS open sourcing approach that they're doing, that's really important for technology firms like ourselves to get involved with and embrace and start to work with.
Well, I want to delve a little bit deeper, this transparency and single source of truth. And great if I kind of whisper myself back to Jane here about price validation and some of the projects you're looking at, because I think they're really difficult challenges that FinOps are faced, different versions of a yield curve, different ways a yield curve are made up, So maybe just elaborating a little bit further for our audience about those projects that are FINOS-sponsored projects. And then Ian, I'm going to turn to you a little bit more colour about what they mean for a firm like ING. So Jane, maybe a little more colour on those projects would be great, please.
Sure. So one of the projects that's been running for a while, and to Stuart's point about using common data models, that's extremely important. Yeah, point-to-point data exchanges is a big pain point that's extremely costly to do, constant validations going on. We have a project called Product Control Common Template, which is literally doing exactly that. It's trying to create a common data exchange template for validating prices within the product control work stream. There are multiple vendors that are involved. Each vendor has their own format. Each financial institution has been asked to use multiple vendors to validate their pricing. And therefore, you can imagine that's just n times n. So having a common template can bring extremely high efficiencies to this process. We have we have actually a financial object special interest group, which is exactly focused on that, just creating common data models and proliferating the use of common data models within the financial services space. So anyone who's interested should definitely attend and propose data models that they would like to mutualize. We have other projects such as that's been recently approved. It's called Open Data Standard for Regulatory Taxonomy. It was proposed by Deutsche Bank, and it's aiming to standardize the taxonomy of regulations so that firms can answer questions such as which regulations are applicable to me and what is the best way I can comply with them in a common standard way, because the regulations are common for everyone. We have other projects which were recently approved, such as TRACK, which was proposed by Accenture, and liquidity capital ratio, which was proposed by Morgan Stanley as an initial implementation. So we have quite a few that both mutualize the development of the regulation code, regulation logic, as well as the data standard.
So Ian, turning to you, there's a lot to build off there. One, kind of open source, inner source within ING, looking at open source to address some of these challenges. But also, Ian, maybe just sharing with our audience examples of projects within ING where you're adopting these principles to address some regulatory challenges. It would be great to share with us.
Yeah, look, we've had an influx over the previous years of regulations, and there's no sign of regulations slowing down for organisations like ING or major global investment banks. The challenge for us all is how do we embed these new regulatory requirements into our operating environments, and our systems haven't always been capable of doing this. So our systems, some of the mainframes that we've been using over the past years are not up to speed with some of these new regulatory requirements. Therefore, the opportunity to be agile and work with some of these new and more modern technologies really helps us enable compliance. And what we've been doing and embedding these solutions with ING, we've been working with a number of different vendor and RegTech capabilities across regulatory horizon scanning, data privacy, reporting, transaction reporting to solve challenges around EMEA and MiFID, reconciliation solutions. So these have all been embedded to help us strengthen our core environments and some of the manual processes that we do to try and tactically manage the regulatory requirements.
But there's a raft of regulation, a raft of changes, a raft of problems. I'm going to turn to you, Stuart, and maybe just explore a little bit further about no-code, because Legerity take great pride that you're a no-code platform. Could you just maybe just elaborate on what that means as a no-code platform in this RegTech space and the benefits you're seeing for your customers?
Sure. Ian raises a fantastic point there around, I think everyone can look at having standardized data models and data objects and that, but the actual path to implement those is often very challenging. There's a lot of legacy technology that's there already. So what we do at Legerity is when we faced with a problem like this, we try and pick off a piece that we can get involved in, that's manageable and scalable, often a new business or something like that. So we'll pick something like that up and we'll implement our technology there, and that includes the no-code accounting rules. So that gives us that flexibility and hands the ownership back to the ultimate customer. So once we train them up on how to configure the accounting rules, they become self-sufficient in that. And then when they need to enhance it and move it forward from there, they have that capability and they can do that very quickly without having to go through a whole long development process and life cycle and release process. So we pick up something that's manageable, that's going to provide benefit, and can be a bit of almost a Trojan horse to start to move further across the organisation and start to solve these problems for them.
These agile solutions that Ian touched on there. I just want to turn to the audience too to say there's a raft of information available online, both at the Resource Centre or FINOS org. That's the details on our screen right now, and the Legerity Resource Centre too, if you want to pick on some of the use cases that both Jane and Stuart are there. Jane, I'm going to touch to you, turn back to you, and I'm going to ask each of my panelists one final question. Jane, we talked, you have an industry perspective of the cooperability and collaboration that's happening among these regulated firms. If there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away from our brief chat today on RegTech and RegTech innovation, what would that be?
So it's the word innovation. It's everybody would love to create innovative, cutting edge solutions. And it's really hard to do innovation by oneself without a community. And what we see that a lot of people who come to FINOS, who come to open source, come because they feel that this is a great place for innovation and working on innovative solutions together. And innovation within the regulatory compliance space is extremely important for people as well. And so this is my big takeaway. Come to open source, come to FINOS, and work with us on innovating together across the community.
Brilliant. And we'll share on screen, audience, lots of ways to get involved with FINOS at the end of the show. There's lots of ways you can sign up to the different SIGs and different groups. Ian, turning to you, if there's one thing you'd like the audience to hear, maybe from your particular role as co-chair of the SIG with FINOS, but also maybe your work with ING, and maybe a call to action to other vendors and innovators out there, what would be the one thing you'd like folk to take away from our brief chat today, Ian?
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with Jane. Innovation is hard, but look, it's about everyday progress and getting involved in doing it together, because without other participants, regtechs, regulators, financial institutions, the industry doesn't move. So it's about us coming together to really solve these challenges.
But just a raft of regulation you touched on, Ian, as well. You've got MiFID and regulatory reporting and financial transparency. ESG is coming down the tubes as well now as well. So it's almost like RegTech is BAU almost, isn't it? Change is BAU. I think it would be a fantastic topic in itself. And Stuart, as host of today, as our banking showcase, I think last word to you, if there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away, maybe about our chat here about RegTech, but maybe broader too about Legerity Fastpost, what would that be?
Sure. Well, I guess we're all sort of clambering to agree with Jane, and collaboration across the industry is really important. I think my sort of addition to that really is make sure you choose something that's manageable to start with. I think too many projects start with too greater ambition. So start with something that you can manage, something you can create a success from, something you can get the buy-in across your organisation, and then work from there.
That came up earlier too about kind of bridging the gap. Do one small piece, build out from there. Fantastic stuff. Well, listen, I just want to really thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Jane. It was absolutely fascinating. I don't know where the time goes; it zips by. Just even to say, turning to the audience, and thank you, dear audience, for tuning in. I just want to thank all of my guests today. To thank Dafydd Llewellyn, General Manager EMEA of insightsoftware, kicking us off. To Liz Sipiere, Chief Revenue Officer of Legerity, for her scene set on banking as a service and for embedded finance. And then we went with our first of our interview sessions with our industry panel to Ron Kersic, Future Architect ING, and Nicholas Whites, VP of Sales at Legerity. And we looked at in greater detail there, banking as a service, of what is it, how does it work, what are the benefits, and how would you measure them? And then finally to the closing panel today, to Stuart Eden, COO at Legerity, to Ian Hollowbread, MD at ING, and to Jen Gavronsky, to CTO at FINOS. Thank you ever so much. All of the details are on screen just now if you'd like to follow up and get any further details on any presentations you've heard today. Thank you.